Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Cruz.
This is Bryce Vine.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Sebastian Younger.
This is Daryl Ames.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Pete, I'm Dr. Brian Price, Associate Professor of History at Hawaii Pacific University, and we're on with the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
All right, so I got Brian here, and this just is a happy accident because Brian happened to be driving through Southern California. I know Brian from, it'll be 10 years here pretty quick. But I know you from way back. We both have deployed to Afghanistan in the same program, and now we're sitting across from each other in a bar just on accident. You add to a long list of PhDs that have been on the show. Most recently, another fellow human terrain guy, Dr. Richard Leday, who I've done a lot of research with. He ended up deploying a couple months after you guys did. He basically arrived like January 1 in our deployment.
Okay, sure.
So
where did he go? Do you know?
He went to me where I was, and we went to Mazan, the Zabul province, just a little bit east of Kandahar, and we did a lot of work. And he allowed me to bring in the theory and the political science elements because he's a political scientist.
Right.
And so we've done a lot of work together. And we just published, we are waiting for the journal to publish a peer-reviewed, everything's all set, just waiting for them to actually throw it in and put some binding on the paper. A paper on the ethical pitfalls of female engagement, I'll say, in conflict zones. And it's even the title causes problems.
No doubt. Yeah.
Because we have the word empowerment in there for a reason, partly because that's what we try to do. We try to empower these female. Women are already empowered. You're illustrating my point. Get off my back. So we did that. But also we had on a guy named Jonathan Sabat, and he works at UCSD. He's a geneticist, and he's like, look, autism is not caused by vaccinations. It's caused by genes. I can show you the genes, and we don't have the whole gene process figured out, but what we know is, irrefutable. It's academic. You know how this stuff goes. So we have a lot of really interesting people. We've had Nobel Prize winners, that kind of thing. And so your PhD-ness is added to a long list of peers that is pretty substantial and fantastic. So, man, thanks for coming on and hanging out.
It's my pleasure, Pete, of course.
How do folks find you on the internets?
Yeah, I've got a page on academia.edu. Just look for Brian R. Price on there, and I'll show up. A little picture of me in front of the helicopter in Afghanistan, in fact. So
nice.
Easy to find.
Nice. So what did you pick up? Like we talked, you guys went through training ahead of me, and then I showed up at the end of that, and then we all went and did that cornball stuff out at Tigerland. But since that time, what have you experienced in terms of, like you're a master at ancient combat or early historic combat, but now what do you know? Yeah,
well, since, the deployment kind of shifted directions, obviously, like you guys, it's like, well, this is what the hot mission is right now, so let's go dig into this. And, of course, we were all sent down there as Afghan SMEs, which, we know how to research, but we weren't Afghans, and we didn't speak, Farsi or Dari or anything. So I came back from the deployment. I thought we had a successful double deployment. They were going to keep me on for 4 more years until sequestration. I was not happy with that. Just when you think you're, making everything hit, then all of a sudden, no, it's time to go home. And I thought we did some really good work in Kapisa province in particular, because it's kind of Afghanistan writ small. You got Pashtuns in the south, and you got, everybody else in the north, and you got some Pashtun that don't like anybody. And all the arms, that attacking in Kabul and Bagram are going through there. So we had kind of a hot zone, but we had a lot of success in there too. Sort of some textbook stuff, and then some not so successful things like everybody. But I came back from that wondering, wanting to dig more into the theory. So I read virtually everything I could find on coin theory and whatnot when I came back, trying to sort of put the whole deployment in perspective. What was this thing that we were doing? Stuff I sort of wish we had before we went down there.
Right.
But nonetheless, in a teaching capacity, I took a professor slot. Pretty much, I've interviewed during a mortar attack in Ghazni. Why are you wearing a vest? I don't worry about it. It's fine. And got the job. Had virtually no downtime. So went from Afghanistan to Hawaii. Kind of a little different change of venue.
Boy.
But I was teaching people who had also been deployed, but in uniform usually. And so they had a very different perspective, particularly the junior folks, of course, because they don't really have any theory. They have some experiences, but they have no way to process that stuff. Of course, coming from where we were supposed to be able to give them that sort of stuff while we were downrange. But this actually let me percolated even further. So read all the stuff, did a number of classes on strategy and counterinsurgency and that sort of thing. But still was letting it bounce around inside my head, kind of thinking about what I really thought about this stuff. And that's culminated into an article I just did recently for Joint Force Quarterly in October, entitled Human Terrain at the Crossroads. And there I talk about the military's struggle with sociocultural information, all the way back to Project Camelot in the 60s and the disaster that became. And of course, I bring more of a historical perspective, looking at the documents to see what this looked like in advance, not so much the theory, although I do have a BA in that. But I took my graduate degree in history because I thought that the theory tends to obscure too many variables, and we don't know what the interaction of those variables is. So trying to call what those variables are in advance and say, well, this is the one that does it. It's like, that always kind of bothered me a little bit. So in history, it's not really predictive, though. But you can go back after the fact and say, well, okay, these things all seem to interweave in a very complex manner. And it does bring an appreciation for complexity, which I think was really helpful downrange because we didn't have enough information ever. Right. Not enough to get any validity from a social science point of view.
But also at the same time, too much information.
That's right, of course. And that's in part what graduate teaching is about too. Look, here's an ocean of information. This is what it's going to be like when you go down, when you do your job, whether you become a diplomat or an intelligence analyst or an officer, you're going to have an ocean of data and you're going to have to figure out what's important right now. And that's not easy. So then, of course, we were also in a bridging role. Not only do you have to try and understand where the Afghans coming from, but you also have to understand what the unit's trying to do.
Right.
And then all the other players. What are the NGOs doing? What's state doing? What's USAID doing? Maybe what the Intel guys are doing, who knows? But essentially, I found that bridging really handy. And since I teach in an interdisciplinary program, that's the situation they're going to be in. They're going to be facing, they're going to be sitting side by side, shoulder by shoulder, with people who have very different perspectives and very different agendas.
Right.
I've really been focused on that for a lot of this time. Recently, I picked up a graduate project I had that's looking at the Air Force modernization in the post-Vietnam era. And I had done a project on that in grad school and then set it down with a promise to Major General Al Hurley that I would turn it into an article eventually.
Okay.
Well, I went to a Society for Military History meeting and was talking to a publisher, and he's like, well, article, hell, it needs to be a book, and I can get it wide circulation right now within the community because we're facing something really similar now. So a year ago, I started diving back into that stuff, and that's what I've been working on this last year.
Okay, let's back up, and we'll close out and get to the book, but let's talk a little bit, because it's not even all the way.
No.
You're still working on it.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't want to put you in a bad spot talking about it, but let's get back a little bit and talk about some of the things. So here's Pete's idea. A lot of the coin theory is from the wrong perspective.
Sure.
Okay, so I completely reject the hearts and minds thing. Like a lot of the coin trust, as opposed to the coindinistas, they're like, we know hearts and minds doesn't work. Yeah, but that's because we don't need hearts and minds. We need the Afghan central government to have hearts and minds. If I go out into the villages and I can't find a trace of government impact, there is no affect towards the government. Right. And it's all affect over effect. This is one of the things where the Army, I say Army, I mean State Department, USAID, all of the players, they all focus on we did these things, therefore, which leads to the bigger picture of like a vertical spectrum, right? Where you have the theory, you have the strategy, and the stated outcomes. Like we're going to have 50,000 girls in school, and so you go out and you test for that specifically, and there's a performance of that, not an actual presence.
Right.
So,
but that's a measure of performance, right? Not a measure of effectiveness, which tells you, is that the right thing to even do?
Right, and there is no measure of affectiveness. Right. So even if you can find girls in school, can Brian and I go 2 days later and find those same girls in school?
Sure.
When there's not a performance for the Americans, and you and I both know the answer.
Right.
There's no. So.
Or even for the Afghan government, right? Because if ostensibly what you're trying to do is to get people to rally around that, and it's better to have an Afghan do it badly than an American. Yeah, okay, maybe.
Yeah.
But this really, I've come to the sort of same position where it's sort of, okay, this is really an information problem. This is a perception problem. This is I don't like to use ideology, but it is a set of beliefs. It's where they stand, and typically that's a point that in the earlier colonial era, probably the British and French were better at this in some places, and they did it better in some areas because they were there for a long time and they integrated with the culture and so on. And there were a lot of broken experiences in there that led them to eventually that sort of wisdom that's come down. But that wisdom is lost in a single generation because the experience is gone and then people don't have it.
And it's slow, delicate work.
It
and
is.
like you said, it's all born on the back of mistakes.
Yeah.
Like you have to go, God damn, I can't believe I was doing that. But then you get better. But at some point you're like, I want to go home and have some chicken and wings and see my family. And so those lessons do leave. But that's one of the biggest problems. So Dr. Rickards, our paper partly talked about the commander's ethos. The ethical pitfalls of empowering women is that a commander, so I haven't written the paper for it, but there's clearly, for me, a point where you reach ethical saturation. And once you fill the ethical beaker, the outcomes outside of that, although they are quote-unquote ethical, no longer make sense. And you get the exact opposite. You get chaotic responses. So what's Pete talking about? When you go out and you have to train, let's say you have 1,000 hours to train your troops pre-deployment, and you're going to be like, well, we have to be prepared to encounter the enemy. So I've got to work on these 500 specific individual tasks, and that takes 1,200 hours. You're already in the negative.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, and and it's like, oh, and by the way, if you see a man raping a young boy, like that requires specific training because you can't just go around shooting and assassinating people because that makes you a murderer. So you, at some point you're like, yeah, I want to empower females. Well, how are you prepared to do that? Well, we have women, and they're going to talk to women. Okay, how do I fire an M16 or an M4 rifle at 350 meters? Well, you take your windage into account, you click, and all very detailed, specific things. And if there's a malfunction with the rifle, it's sports. Slap, pull, absorb, release, tap, shoot.
Sure.
Nothing like that kind of detail exists on interpreter operations, female engagement, all of these things.
Well, this is why it's
lacking.
You can teach a technical skill, and that's training.
Right.
But really, the other stuff requires education. That's an art. And that means that you're going to have to apply a set of principles, and then you're going to have to use both astute observation, understanding, and creativity to interface and solve the problem. And that's why, I mean, the military in particular usually has this idea of training.
Yeah.
But not such a good idea maybe on education. They understand that they need it. But it's very difficult, as you said, to weave it in. How do you do it when you got those 1,200 tasks?
Yeah.
Oh, and now I need an educated officer, too, who, as a junior officer has been shown the school solution. We say creativity, but he's got to go through and come up with this stuff all the way along.
Right.
Oh, and then he goes to the war college, and suddenly I want you to be creative. It's like, oh, well, okay, that's tough. And I get the problems that they have trying to get people through that system. By the way, you're supposed to be an infantry commander or platoon leader or whatever.
Close with and destroy the enemy.
But
that's
also we want you to be a diplomat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. That doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means that, it takes a lot more wisdom and understanding than we really have available in the system at the moment.
It also takes external eyes. That's where you and I come in, Dr. Rich, Will Hardy, all these different guys. We're able to go out on the ground and see what can't be seen by the unit. Because when that commander shows up, so one of the things I always preach to all my commanders, you want to know the most influential person in this valley? It's you. The second you show up, anything you do, you show up, everything moves out of your way. And they all work to suffice or satisficing, all of those academic kind of terms. So until you can reduce your influence in that area, and it's not how an Afghan does it poorly is good, it's how does that Afghan do it? How would they approach it? And let's not assess how it is. Let's see if we can tease that out. So one of the things is I pick a ministry of education. If you dominate that relationship all the time and never allow that person to make their own mistakes, if you don't figure out...
And what's a mistake?
Yeah, and what's a mistake, right. And then figure out how things flow horizontally as well as vertically. Because we want to get books from A to B to C. Okay, well, you don't just do it. You say... we start nowhere near books, what's your plan? So I took my governor and I said, what do you want to do? What's your plan? And I translated it into an Army format, and the Army rejected it at first. There's no way this is real. And I'm like, I'm not a dummy. I've been doing this a long time. This is in your format so you can see what he's trying to do, what he needs from you, and what he doesn't need. And these over half the initiatives had nothing to do with the Army.
Sure.
But it took 6 months for me to make that, and we were never prepared to provision it completely because the unit that allowed me to do it was leaving.
Right, of course.
And the next unit's like, I don't know what that is, but we're looking after the...
Our idea is this.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna push the Taliban south. Like, what Taliban? Like, they're not gonna line up and get in front of you. What are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
Well, I think the understanding how it will work in their culture is critical. I mean, we had a patrol where we stopped one time and they're like, hey, you got to clean out these drainage culverts because they're all clogged up now. And the until the guys are busy scribbling it down. It's like, hang on a second. These culverts have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. So how do they usually get cleaned out?
Yeah.
So I was talking to people, and they're like, well, when our dad's day, what happened is we'd all get together, and we'd all clean it out, and then we'd kill a goat, and we'd have a meal.
Yeah.
Which bonds the village together, and it's
Yeah.
like, there's a whole bunch of other subtle second and third order things that are pretty important. Now they expect the government to do it. It's like, okay, well, first of all, the government isn't doing it.
Right.
So you're setting up a fail right there off the bat. So, and if the money stops at any point, they won't be able to do it.
Right.
So finding some solution for this problem that resonates with the way the locals have to have things done is important because they have to live there. We don't.
Yeah.
So ultimately, what we'd like for them is stability. Ultimately, it doesn't have to be American stability. It just needs to be stability in the sense of, it's not a vacuum so that the Taliban are moving, or the Hig or whoever it is are moving in there. And that's why the security is in there. And frankly, I went into very few villages where they didn't say, hey, we'd really rather have you stay.
Yeah.
Because those other thugs will just come in here and they're brutal. We don't like that.
Yeah.
But we don't have the physical power to stay away, which is what the commander hears right away. It's like, security, got it, right on it.
Yes.
It's like, yes. And the usual thing is we have to do security, then we can do governance and development.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, you got to do them all at the same time.
Right.
Which means that you've got to figure out what their objectives are. And of course, they weave it through with, oh, well, my cousin, of course, will build the school for us. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there's all the stuff that we would consider corruption, and some of it is. But some of it is also the way that they maintain stability on a local level.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think you need people on the ground looking at that. And I don't think you can reduce it to a paragraph on an intel report or dump it in the DIA and have that be okay, which is what I'm arguing about in my article. I said, basically, here are the different ways that people are addressing this problem. There are people who said it should be in special operations.
Right.
Well, frankly, they already do this.
Yeah.
So it kind of is there. The problem is stovepiping. They can't share it really with everybody else. And they only have so much in the way of resource. And that doesn't help the regular forces.
And I'll be critical a little bit of the special operations guys. They spend a lot of time and effort on cultural training, but they're still an institution that is not designed to really get it right.
Well, it was before this war happened, right? I mean,
that could be. Doctrinally speaking, great. But tactically on the ground, they don't.
Well, that's because they become door kickers, and that's not their fault. That's the missions they were assigned.
Right.
But historically, I mean, special forces, that's not what they were supposed to do. They're supposed to build up, indigenous forces with foreign internal defense. So those guys seem to do that. I mean, think of the Highlanders working with the Highlanders in Vietnam and stuff. That was the program. That's where it started.
And I still think they do that well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't apply to the ground truth.
Right. Well, and even if it does, it's only in their little area, which is there's only so much they can hit. You've got a few people doing it, but then they talk about, oh, well, maybe it should be a State Department function. Okay. But
who's going to man that?
Right. How many officers, foreign service officers do they have? Not enough. Maybe intellectually they would fit. Sure.
Right.
But
and how many they want to have show up dead?
Well, and they don't have any security, right? So that's why DOD ends up doing it all. And so then some people say, well, it should be a company outside that they can just spin up at will. Okay. But then you've got all the contracting garbage running in with that.
Right.
So my solution was different. I said, no, this isn't the final solution. I said, we should kick this around, though. Why don't you make it a reserve officer position?
Uh-huh.
So you get somebody that's teaching full-time in the university or doing whatever they're doing.
Right.
Actively out there trying to increase their knowledge most of the time. But you bring them in a weekend a month to interface with the unit. And then when you go, you've got somebody you can trust. There's some downsides to that, right? They're not the outside player then giving the voice on the staff process. They become part of the staff process. So that's kind of a problem. Nonetheless, it's better than the other ones I heard, which is, it should all go to DIA and they should do it.
Oh, come on.
They'll hire an SCI cleared analyst who will know this. Well, it's like, well, he's got a BA. He's never done anything except DOD because otherwise he couldn't have that clearance.
And it's all threat-based then, too.
Exactly. It's all red layer. And so the white and green layers, the governance and the popular point of view fall away completely, which gets you right back to where we were, the self-fulfilling prophecy and the same information, which is why I think while our program, suffered from a number of flaws, most commanders would say they found it valuable. Expensive, perhaps, but valuable.
I even know that it's expensive. I can save my commander all that money. Quit spending money on the bazaar. I can't find anybody that wants you to rebuild it. General comes down, we're going to put money on the bazaar. Just shut up. Sergeant Major's like, we're going to build Sergeant Major Academy. Shut up. Don't say that. No one wants that thing.
Right.
You're on problem 920. That's not even necessarily on the list. And they're on 2.
Right.
So let me ask you this. So one of the things I learned about was that stability. Okay, so the governor says female education is my number one priority.
Okay.
Okay, great. how do we do it? And he's like, well, you have to.
And this is in Zabul.
This is in Zabul. It's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Open territory for the Taliban, but for the listeners to understand, the Taliban players don't have to engage the military. So they're not driving around in vehicles. They're not in formations. It's just agents. Right. And they move around. And they never show up dead because we can't go out and just find them and kill them. It's also incredibly tough to move physically. So if you move on foot, and the Army hates to admit this, if you move on foot more than 45 minutes out, you're at extreme risk of whatever's out there. And you don't know what's out there. Yeah, you have some message traffic and you might hear something, but they also know that that's happening. So if they choose to ambush, you're staying ambushed until the reserve, the platoon that's there, and now there's no one back at home, basically, except for a skeleton crew. And it's so remote and rugged, again, you can't bring vehicles. You will not get a vehicle.
No, you're depending on ISR primarily. So.
Right.
The predator sound to scare people off.
Sure. And maybe a Kiowa to buzz through the valley, and that works. But you're at the mercy of a lot of things now, and it can get really ugly really fast if they choose to make that fight. So understand that this is not a traditional fight. It's a tension fight. It's a people fight. It's an information fight.
It is.
So as this governor talked about female education, he was saying four things have to happen before we can get to this. This is the number one priority. And I'm like, you have to explain this to me. He's like, well, there has to be security. And I'm like, got it. And he's like, you don't get it. You don't get it. The dad needs to be able to leave the house, go to his place of business, and come home safely.
Right.
While he's gone, his home needs to be safe from harm. And then if those two things are possible, then his kids need to be able to travel to and from school safely. Right. Otherwise, there will be no education. Before any girls get educated, we have to make sure that the boys get educated because they run the families, they run the farms, they run the businesses. And that
though not the household.
Right, though not the household. But the household schooling happens in the house.
Right.
So, and he's like, I have daughters. I want them to go to school. But the boys, we are so far behind on education. And that is a bitter pill for the female side of it. But the reality is that, like, this is a hard place to survive. And these boys have to get educated, but they can't because dad's like, I can't even leave my house to make money today. And the money I do bring is only going to go to feed some portion of the Taliban because I have to give it to them.
And you're going to have to stay home some, by the way, with the AK to make sure that happens.
Exactly. So this is the problem, too, because like you say, security to the commander, and as I write my report, I'm like, they don't want you to do anything. Let's understand what security is to these guys. And that's just...
Actually, the word is problematic.
Yeah.
When it's translates. I was always wondering, well, how are you translating that? I mean, let's look at these social science questions. Like, I don't know if that resonates. I would tend to ask people more broad things. Like, tell me about the big problems in your village.
Yeah, sure.
And let them come up with the terms because they're going to give you the order that they're in already. And if you get 4 or 5 of those and you lay them on top of each other, it's pretty easy to figure out what it is. But if you ask them, tell me about security in your village, well, they're going to give you the canned answer that they're expecting to get.
Let me do some shorthand expansion here for some context for you and for the audience. When I say this, I'm boiling months worth of conversations into one thing really fast. But you're right. And then even in that 3-layered conversation about security, I would love to have had more time to dig into that to understand what equals security. Are there subsets to those 3? Are there, while we're talking about it, because you're right, it's you can't bring those things up. When I said, what's your plan, one of the things I did leading up to building the trust so that he would give me his plan was I got him up out of his office and I had him walk me through the bazaar because it's all connected, same little area. Right. And he's like, and over here, this used to be a hotel. This is going to be a hotel again. And I know the guy that used to run it, and his family is and he's like, had this whole, and he could see it.
So he's got a vision at least.
Yeah. And he put me into his virtual bazaar. Right. And I'm like, well, where do you start? Like, what do you do? How do you, what are the things? And then slowly we picked it together. And then you'll like this. So I took his plan as he gave it to me, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to put this into a PowerPoint presentation. I had to explain this to him now, too. And he's like, oh, okay.
It's the bridging function. Now you got to bridge the other way.
And then I took it and I made it, right? Like, so I'm showing Brian my fingers. Let's say these are the arrows of effort, right? And they're all kinds of different things. There's sizes and fading colors and all the things that the Army loves.
You get your tab. Excellent.
Right, exactly. And I took it and I went, and I jumbled it all up, and I handed it back to him like an E4 would with all the mistakes. And the guy's like, no, this is all wrong. This goes here. This goes here. I need more here, less up. And he edited the entire thing. And so then I went, okay, cool. And the solution that I had originally had before I jumbled it was damn good. maybe not perfect, but now I have an even more perfect answer. So when I took it to the Army and they spit the bit and go, that's fake, he didn't do it. Like, of course he didn't do it in PowerPoint. I did. They're like, no, the planning part, that's fake too. And I'm like, you want to know the story about this thing? I'm glad. And then by the time I get through that whole thing, they're like, all right, yeah, whatever he wants to do. Those conversations, those questions, you're right, you have to be very careful in how you do it.
Well, it depends on how responsive the local officials are. You know, what their expertise is too.
Sure.
Do they have a clear vision? And more importantly, does that vision actually connect to what the residents want?
Yeah.
That's a different case. I mean, we had a governor in one of my places where his vision would line up with the ISAF vision perfectly. But I wasn't convinced that the locals thought that was a great vision at all.
Right.
So we could build him his buildings and all of that stuff. We could plant trees and all these things. But I'm not sure that any of that was going to get mileage when he went out and talked to folks. His deputy, however, was extremely religious, but very well connected in the community. And so we sort of used a two-pronged thing where we'd go to the governor and talk about some things, we go to the deputy governor and talk about other things.
Yeah.
And so the hope was that we could get those two connected so the deputy could be the guy that was out talking to folks all the time, and then he could bring it in, and we could forge something where we weren't really in the middle of it. We had the benefit, you guys probably did this too, but of course every spring there's flooding because of the way the mountains are structured, in Capisa especially. And we were hoping that, this is a good opportunity to show people in some of these valleys that get wiped out that, oh, look, the Army can help you. The people in the local government can help you if they're organized enough to do it.
Yeah.
And they have an interest, but they didn't have the expertise.
Yeah.
So the State Department people and the USA people and the PRT spent a lot of time offering training to how those things work, how to do, how to get the Army and the local government together to work on things, how to get all that stuff labeled up and get the supplies from Bagram and get it out to people who need it, and then how to call for backup help if you really get in a jam. And they were pretty willing in that province, at least, to go for it. But in another province I was in, they were not willing at all.
Sure.
And their vision was basically more power for me.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, clearly that's not going to resonate. So this is the problem that we have in COIN generally, right? Which is if the host government is corrupt or isn't competent, what do you do? Can you really do anything except counter terror? And my thought is probably not. I mean, you can, in Afghanistan in particular, you got a problem where you're hoping to build a democratic base,
right?
But all those intermediate institutions are missing.
But even within that, you have to go a step earlier because it's not our perception of corruption because we're the corruptor.
Right.
We're
one of them.
Yeah. Well, and the most thickly
we're the second
lined
richest
pockets.
one.
Yeah.
Well, the poppies are probably richer, but yeah.
Well, we can get into poppy too, but one of the problems is okay. These guys are all corrupt. Well, hold on.
Right.
Like, where's the money coming from? Oh yeah, that's right. It's coming from us.
Right.
We're funding these buildings. And how would they have funded this before? Well, they would have gone to the uncles. Have we talked to the uncles? No, we haven't talked to the uncles. Well, then what the fuck are we doing fucking with it then? You know? I talked to an ag guy, and I said, what are we doing here? And he's like, oh, yeah, we're going to... he gave me the whole PowerPoint slide speech on how they were going to improve ag in the area. And I'm like, describe for me the market chain from farmer to the consumer in another country. I don't know that. Then why are you fucking with it?
Yeah, we actually have better luck with that. We were talking about value propositions and so on. Now, that's right. My background in business helped a bit because, okay, well, I know what to look for and I know how this is supposed to work. I don't know this market, but I know what to ask. So I spent a lot of time with shopkeepers saying, okay, where do you get your supplies from? Who does your labor for you? Where do you sell your stuff? And that enabled us to put some things together. And in our area, at least, the USAID guys had a better view of things that fit in with the local thing. The locals they have crazy ideas sometimes too. There was a weaving factory where they made cotton fabric before the Russians went in there. And it's almost a picture postcard of how it was on the day the Russians parachuted in because there's still crates on the dock with these new German weaving machines. And at that time, in 1979, that was cutting art stuff. And this huge factory that they thought they could get running again had its own power plant, its own rail system. Pretty impressive, all financed by the Germans.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, $2 million, we can get this up and running. Well, first of all, that I was looking at it with my economic guy. It's like, it's $100 million probably to get this up and running. And the stuff that you'd be making is now made in India, China, et cetera. Right. There's no way you can compete with that. So the question is, plus you want the local culture, but then also they have to be aware of the world culture. And in places like the Philippines, when the U.S. went in there, one of the things that happened was that 1,500 school teachers went over as volunteers to teach one of the world languages, in our case, English. The French have done this too, which gives a language that they can use to make commerce when they get outside of there.
Yeah.
And today, of course, the Philippines are tied into the economy, partially because of that linguistic thing. If they were all speaking Tagalog or whatever, it'd be very difficult for them to get out. So having a lingua franca of some sort, English, French, something that they can move out with was pretty important. But of course, that was one of the things that we were told not to do. You don't want to ding that too much.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how are they going to talk to... They have... amazing wool products that they could sell, probably in Paris and stuff. We thought that maybe you could get something together with, say, some of the designers in Milan or Paris. Say, make it a thing. Make it Afghan wool, not just any wool. Make it Afghan wool.
Yeah.
It's
conflict wool.
It's lightweight. You can fly it out. You don't have to use a Pakistani port.
Yeah.
And it's something only you have.
Right.
And it could generate some money for you. You already know how to weave it. The only thing you don't know how to do is ship it out and market it.
Right.
And the people in Paris and Milan know how to cut it. So looks like that one could be a win for you based on something that you know how to do, but also interfacing internationally.
Sure.
That would have taken somebody to talk to the people in Milan or Paris and get the interest going because you need demand of some sort.
Yeah.
But the blending of what they do natively with what the world is likely going to do is one way to help economically, because the local focus is important, and most of our program was focused on that. But there's a larger economy that they work in. Yeah. And it's very difficult, particularly there were very few people in our program that had any expertise in economics to even look at that.
It's really tough with the economic aspect because as soon as you turn that part of the machine on, the entire area has an impact from that. And it'll suck the power out of that one thing because there's not enough. There's not enough of anything. There's not enough power. There's not enough God. There's not enough.
It creates demand for everything.
Yeah. So it's really delicate work. So again, let's get back to these PRTs and USAID folks that they try. The intention is always there, but like you said, the training, the education, they go there and they do the best that they can. But my experience is by and large, they're more focused upward on the command above them and the boss and the boss and the boss than what the farmer needs. So they bring. Across Iraq and Afghanistan, we would do these trainings. What no one really did was went back and went, "What'd you learn today?" And so I started doing that in Iraq. Like, "Hey, what'd you learn today? What happened?" And they'd say, "Oh man," and by now they know me. They're like, "Mr. Pete," we learned about farming today. Like, what do you farm? Just so I can get it into the record. Like pomegranates, as you know. How long's your family own this place? A long time. Cool. What did you learn? Like, I put less water on the pomegranates. Like, oh, that's okay. What happens then? Pomegranates get bigger. I'm like, all right, are you going to do it? And the guy's like, maybe. How much less water? And the guy holds his hands about 18 inches apart and says, not much less. And I'm like, what does that mean? And he's like, I don't know. I'm like, seriously, what happened today? And he looks over his shoulder, the international sign for him. All right, here's what really happened. They came in and they talked to us, and they do this all the time, and they bring the guy out, and they tell us the Afghan guy's on our side, but he's terrified to be out here with us. We're in the country. He's an educated man, and that's fine. We're not mad at him, but, he's not supposed to be comfortable around us. No, I'm not going to do what they told me because I can't. Look, that might be right. You guys know everything about science and everything, and maybe it's right, but I can't feed my family if it's wrong. Right. So it's not going to happen. And I'm like, okay, cool. Is that going to be the same thing everybody else in the valley is going to say? And he's like, yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Here's what we need. And I'm like,
well, there's the key thing, right? What do we need?
Feed and seed. Okay, cool. And I don't need any pomegranates. I got all the pomegranate seeds I need. I need the other things. And so if a wheat farmer has more wheat, it's less expensive for me to buy wheat. He's got more to sell. Sure. And it's like, all right, cool. But you go, you write that in a report, and then the ag guys all get mad. That's not true. Like, hey, I'm just telling you a conversation I had. Right. You want to say it's not true because of something that you think you've done? I can't find evidence of it. I'll go up and down this valley if you want, and I'll ask the questions, but I'm not going to find it. Because these guys don't believe in what you're doing. So instead of focusing, I'm really big on this, Brian, is where is the work? Yes, education's important, and that's a nice tactical or operational goal, but the ground truth doesn't allow for it. These guys are like, how do I get the DALE, in this case, the agricultural ministerial representative audience? It's the person who's like, I work for the county, and I'm going to be out here and talking to you guys about ag. That's my job. That guy doesn't want to be out there because he's not from that area. Right. And he's going to get yanked around by the collar by the Americans and forced to do his job. And so that makes him go, what the hell? I don't need to be here. And so they barely participate. So when you slow those guys down and say, ag team, get off this guy's back. Find out what he's about. Find out what – it's not that he's incompetent. So this brings me all the way around to the thing I wanted to bring up to you. we developed this tool. It's more of an illustrative tool. So you have an XY axis, and in each quadrant you have different things, and it's a three-dimensional thing. So it's kind of a Z axis that goes from the XY axis. Put that aside for a second. But basically, if the perception is incompetence, passive-aggressive, corruption, those are all led to either not understanding the goals or not understanding the decision-making process.
Or not agreeing with them.
Right. What? And then are you able to see that? So when you see passive-aggressive behavior, if you see incompetence, you have to say to yourself, as the engager, as the facilitator, oh, I might be ignorant of their goal-making, their decision-making, and what it takes for them to be on board with what I want. I'm just pushing them to do this thing, and that's why they're being passive-aggressive. And you let them have the chance to actually, you stop and you go.
This episode of the Break It Down Show is brought to you by Lions Rock Productions.
That's us.
We publish, evaluate, and develop podcasts just like this one, consult others to build their own, and create associated content and content marketing strategies.
So if you're launching or expanding your social media presence, your business or your personal brand, or if you just want to take your media presence to the next level,
reach out to us on Twitter
at Pete A. Turner
or at JohnLG69.
at the Break It Down Show.
There's 1,000 ways to get a hold of us.
Now enjoy the show.
I may understand what you guys are doing. How do you make these decisions on what projects are important to you as the Dale or whatever it is?
Right.
And then they have to understand your thing. That's where the Z connects the other XY axis. Is you have to say, listen, here's what my commander needs me to do. I have to show them progress. I have to do this. So I'm supposed to kind of take you around and put you in village 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 and get you to inoculate all these goats. Do you understand? So if I don't do that, I've got to have a good reason. I'd like to have your reason why we're going to do whatever you're going to do, because then but that takes something that isn't trained in NTC or JRTC or anywhere else.
Well, it's because there has to be, to put it in sort of Army terms, you've got to have harmony behind what the mission's going to be.
Right.
Which means you got to have those inputs into the decision-making process for the unit, which is where the program comes in. But of course, the program was done on an ad hoc basis initially, so it wasn't trained in because you didn't join them at NTC or whatever. So it's an enabler, quote unquote, that you're getting downrange. That may or may not help you. Now, there's a plus to that, of course, because they're there through the RIP, so they know what's been going on recently. That is very valuable, I found. Right. But you have to build up the trust relationships with the unit then. And not every unit's the same. Some commanders like, no, man, my only thing is to get these caches out of here. Right. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And understandably, if they're blowing up vehicles right, left, and center, that's going to be his priority. The question in that case is, okay, given that's your mission, that's what you work, do you mind if I work on these other things?
Yeah.
And normally, most staffs that I worked with would say, no, hell no. Tell us what we should be working on. And I think the kicker is building that credibility, which you can't train. That's something that you've got to build up with solving problems for the unit.
I could train
right off that. Maybe. But they weren't doing it.
No.
So
No. And you guys weren't trained how to do it, and you went to the program. It was never even brought up, I'm sure.
No. But the one thing they did have, that the glimmer, sort of, because I thought the training was not great, but the glimmer was that they understood that they needed people who were highly adaptable.
Yeah.
Which I think is right. Now, whether they were getting people like that through the recruitment process is another question, but they at least knew that was what the core stuff that they needed. And they knew that some kind of educational base was needed. They didn't really know what that was. I sort of always thought that maybe anthropology wasn't the best thing because of the historical political fight between anthropology and the military. Maybe that wasn't the best route to go. Really, anybody who had the right sort of adaptability and training in some areas so that they could look at a new set of data and say, okay, what tools do I need to make this make sense?
Sure.
And I'll go get those tools.
Yeah.
Anybody that you can get that from any discipline, but hopefully go outside your discipline. I used all kinds of tools. I used anthropological tools, I used sociological tools, economic tools, and historical tools. Whereas my compatriots didn't know the historical tools, so there's no way they could really use those. So I did the same thing that you sort of did. I said, okay, well, here's some local and oral history techniques you can use to go out and do a rapid assessment of this area just using historical tools that will help you. And understand that data, if you had an economic background and some sociology and some religious studies, that might help.
Yeah.
But, if one of our people came to me and said, we want to talk to the mullahs. We think we can get if we talk to the mullahs here in this province, that's going to help us, or we think it might. which was the intelligent thing to say. It's like, what can you tell us about that? I said, well, I've been here 10 days.
Yeah.
Not that much.
Yeah.
But now I know what you're interested in.
Yeah.
So give me a few weeks and I'll go self-educate back on this to get the background. Then I'll go out and we'll talk to some folks and see what they think the issues might be.
The religion thing, we look a lot into that too, because it's such a look, for us, separation of church and state, that's great. That's not them. No. It's not even the same thing. There's no separation.
It's the same. It is the same thing. Yeah. Well, and it's unusual in the West before the 13th century. It didn't exist either. Yeah. I mean, that was really the break that came between the emperor and the pope. So that's a heritage that is very unique in the West. Everywhere else, it's bonded.
Yeah. So when we go out and we want to engage these mullahs, we're actually and I'm going to be very unfair here, but from my direct experience and talking to dozens of people, not educated in how to do this, looking more on the end of weaponizing, instead of saying when you go through to do an operation, what's the affect? What are the cultural keys here? What are we doing with what's already in line? So we accomplish our goal through their normal path. And then who's accounted for religion? Because if you haven't done it, then you've made something that's weird to them. And it's not going to fit.
Well, and I was, to use a social science term, I would say that we got to have cultural resonance to make any of these things work, which means that it has to make sense to the local population. Now, if you go into a village cluster, there's probably 4 mullahs in there, all with different perspectives, all with different groups, and probably aligned with the factions in the groups. So,
because that's called survival.
Yeah, of course. And so they're sponsoring him, first of all, and he's sponsoring them. So, are there leverage points? Well, maybe, but that doesn't really help us. To the credit of the unit that I was working with, they looked at all the information. We had a bunch of the mullahs on the fob, and they said, yeah, we don't think we're going to be able to use this, which was what I had said. It's like, first of all, using it's the wrong perspective. The perspective that we want is how do we resonate with this? Yeah. How do we take the religious values, the ones that work, and connect with ours and say, let's emphasize those. Yeah. Because those 4 that you have, those line up with what we're doing. So we can reach some harmony between what we need and what you need. It's a win-win. You'll get some stuff out of it. Now, there's other things too, like, hey guys, the road's coming through. Yeah. I know you don't like it, but the road is a fact at this point. So I know that in your ideal sense, you don't want Kabul coming in here. You don't want the Pakistanis coming in here. I get that. But it's already being laid down, and no amount of RPGs are going to stop it. So probably want to stop that. Yeah. But let's figure out how you can preserve what you got with the reality of the road. And so sometimes it's pushing the other way. Yeah. It's like, okay, look. And same thing with the sort of linguistic education. It's like, okay, the world is growing, and your young folks are going off to Kabul. Yeah. They're not staying here in the village. Look at what the population of Kabul's done. They want the new thing. They want to connect. So, you go into a village cluster and you see, a few solar things here and there. Well, they're powering phones. Same thing with the microgenerators. They're powering phones. So they've got connectivity. So they're getting influences from India, from Turkey, from Pakistan, from Iran. And so things are shifting slowly, which is why I've come full circle back to more. It's not really about information operations the way we would think about it. It's more about beliefs. Okay. And so if their beliefs are changing over time. You talked about the female empowerment thing. Yeah. And we had some challenges with that too, where, the engagement officers want to go in and they want to say, hey, we're going to give you phones today. Right. That was particularly one I thought, in an ideal sense, I agree. That's a cool idea. On the flip side, what's her uncle going to say when she shows up with this phone? Crazy? What are the Taliban going to say when they show up and she's got this phone that goes to you?
And then when you do these operations, so there's 5 elements. This is Pete's rule. There's 5 elements at least. And, it's like the elemental chart. You can go find some more of them. To winning in modern combat. Of course, military. You have to close with and destroy the enemy. But at some point, you have to stop doing that because then you can't tell the difference between...
In a connected world, it depends. That is variable. It depends on...
Right. But we have to account for military things. Sure. And then you have to account for cultural, social, political, and religious influences.
Economic, too.
Right. Yeah, if you want to throw economics in there, that's perfect. So if you don't do that, then you're going to have these things like, okay, cool, we're going to go give people phones. And Pete's going to raise his hand and be like, hold on. Have you accounted for the culture? Everybody likes phones. Okay. So the answer to that question is no. Have you accounted for how that impacts the society? No? Oh, okay, good. And then how about politically? You guys counted for that? No. How about religion? Anybody? Yeah. No. So because they haven't done that, like you haven't created anything. So what if you like, we want to do this? You go to the governor. We have a lot of access to a lot of tools. What would make this place better? Well, cell phones. Oh, okay, great. We have an answer for that. Great.
Sure.
How do we give these things out? We give them to me. You guys can be part of the process. I'm not trying to steal them, because they'll say that. No, I'm not trying to steal them. Have the people come to me. What about having you go to them? No. That's not how we do things. I'll send my notes out like I do,
right,
and I'll communicate with the kids that come through and say, hey, tell your dad, cell phone's here.
And that's going to depend on where you are. In other places, they may want,
sure.
They might want to go out and say, this is how these groups always do it.
Yeah.
The problem
and
with
they
that,
might also say, Valley 15, don't go anywhere near that
right,
place.
Yeah, sure.
They'll fucking hate it.
And the problem, though, is that there are a lot of guys who will take those assets and then just use them to aggrandize themselves and build a
sure.
That happens a lot. So sometimes it's the thing.
That's actually a norm, because there's not enough.
Well, and it's
stuff there.
In the patronage culture, that, as a historian, I don't like to generalize like this, but in every place I've seen where there's patrons and clients, they survive by giving stuff out. Yeah. So this is true medievally. It's true all the way up through the Vikings and through the Africa and the Middle East. Where this happens, people seem to say, okay, well, it comes through me and I give it out, and that's how I maintain my power. That's how stability is defended.
Right.
We call that corruption. Whoa, you're giving away. Yeah. Okay, well,
even though we brought the damn things to corrupt the system.
And there is some truth to that. I mean, there's sometimes when I did a big study on this where I was saying, okay, how do you guys, and I don't remember what the Islamic word is for it, or the Pashtun word for it, but there is one, where basically it's their version of corruption. It doesn't quite mean corruption the way we think.
Right.
It's almost unfairness is the way it kind of translates. I wish I could pull the word off the top of my head. But they didn't see a lot of these things, but they do have things that were done that we would call corruption. They would also say, yeah, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Normally if the guy doesn't share, that's corruption. Yeah. So we had a case where the judicial folks were coming in and they were saying, oh, well, we need to arrest this guy. We got a big fat folder on him, and he was a bad dude. No question about it. He was a bad dude. I would like to see him off the field.
Right.
On the flip side, it didn't happen because it was well tied up in Kabul. And no matter how much evidence they have, they're not going to get...
Take a picture of you while you're talking.
Go for it. They're not going to get an Afghan court to say, yes, we're going to put this guy away. And even if they did, he wouldn't stay put away. He'd be out in 5 minutes. So it turned out they wanted to use it as a test case. But it's probably not the best test case. The better test case would be, hey, he's stealing my water. Okay. Can you guys resolve that in the local court? You're trying to give them new ways. What a lot of our institutions wanted to do was to give them new state tools so that they would trust the state more. For example, on conflict management. So use the courts rather than stuff. And people would say, well, they're expensive. Okay, well, that's a problem. Also, I have to give bribes to get the outcome. Okay, well, that's partly why they're so expensive, but they're also too expensive. So, first of all, crafting a system they could even afford, and then building the trust, it's not going to happen by putting a big kingpin away first, because it's not going to work. Yeah. And then it's going to fall apart and it's going to be a very visible fail. But even getting them to use a small thing, like they're stealing our electricity. Yeah. Okay, well, that's stuff that the local... So the first question is, how do you normally handle that? Yeah. Well, the elders get together and they decide that what's going on.
Yes.
Okay, but can you have some version of that then works? Is there a way that blends in with the court system? And that's the stuff that we were working on when I left, was kind of that last, trying to make those things harmonic.
I want to turn it over to you and let you throw me some, because there's a lot of interesting questions that we can do this all day. That's what I really want to say. But you're right. The court thing is extremely challenging because we always want to impose rule of law. But they have a rule of law, and it's based on, get this, religion. So,
or at least local stability, not so much religion.
There's a religious
aspect to it. The Taliban and the Hig bring their own religious courts, but those are also alien.
But if you want to make a decision, and it's a legal decision, there's going to be a dude with a beard in the room. Doesn't have to be a Taliban guy, but he's going to be the Quranic expert in the area.
Right. Although that seems to shift. There's some pretty good studies done that suggest that when there's a foreign invader in Afghanistan, that the influence of the mullah goes up. When that invader or occupier or power is gone, the power of the mullah ebbs. And of course, when the Russians were there, that's how all the money got into Afghanistan, was through the mullahs. So that basically put the thing on steroids. Now, maybe that's changed enough now because the Soviets were there in 79 on through. Maybe that's the way it is now. But historically, over the last few hundred years, that was not the case. It was basically that they were there, but really the elders held the power. Now, of course, when the Taliban or the Hig or ISIS or whoever's bringing in their rule of law, it comes, with an AK behind it.
Yeah.
So much like a state's does. But theirs is much more brutal and much more direct. People would say it's fast, though. And it isn't corrupt. It's just decided according to religious principles instead of the sort of stability of the village.
Yeah.
Because these systems in villages usually are not about justice. They're about stability. It's not so much, okay, you killed my cousin. All right, well, we could put that guy away, but that actually isn't going to solve the problem. What we want is stability in the village. Because when you got only 125 people there, any amount of pushing can throw that thing off balance.
And let's understand, a penal system is expensive, and who's going to collect the taxes?
So they don't do that.
Right.
What they do is they say, okay, there's going to be some sort of guild, some sort of payment that's made, and that's supposed to kill. And if you then go and do vengeance outside of that, then you're at fault, not them. So the elders would get together and they would typically discuss this. Now, this is true amongst Pashtuns, but also amongst Tajiks and the same basic system.
Yeah.
And they would get together and decide what that is. So by handing all of that authority over to a court, that means that the local elders are no longer empowered to do anything.
Yeah.
It disrupts the entire system.
Right.
Or
corrupts. You can even say corrupts.
Sure. And that's kind of, I think the word you use would depend on the perspective that you use. It describes a similar thing, but different takes on that different thing, depending on how you're looking at it.
I use the word a lot because we tend to point our finger and say corruption, and then it's like, well, let's look around at who's doing the corrupting, So let's make a pivot and come back around. What questions do you want to ask me? We've done a lot of experience. I know I shared all my reports with everybody.
Sure.
What did you pull out of that, or what my experience? What do you want to ask me about?
So, if you were going to do your last deployment again, what would you change?
I had a system built by the time I deployed, right? I had been through a number of brigades and battalions, and I knew the RIP process. I knew how to go in there. And I've always said this, and I always will. I spend more time studying us than them because we're so dominant, so powerful. We create our own inefficiencies and our own failure.
Sure.
Which is a norm in unstable regions. I would do my best to find an advocate at the RC, which is above the brigade.
Sure.
Brigade, everybody's about 5,000 people or so, give or take. So up there where they collect all the brigades, there's a lot of people, and my reports don't get up there very effectively. If it does, it's one line, and it's taken out of context and can be flipped any direction that whoever the analyst is wants. So I would want a more of a champion up there, probably not within our organization, probably a colonel sitting somewhere. So I would probably spend more time up there fishing for that, so that I could say, I have a bona fides that I give out to all of the commanders. I needed probably to develop that. And when I was trying to go back, I was talking to Trent, who ran the program, and I said, I'd like to go back. I want to build my own dream team. Here's what I want to do. And my job was going to be to integrate above at the RC level and have my guys on the ground collecting and managing that process. So there was a vertical type. Because, in general, the program wanted you to come by and check in when you went through on your way home or whatever.
Right.
But they wanted a lot, but they brought no value. So the value I was going to bring was to say, this stuff is happening. This is a model. We should be looking into this more. What's happening over here, and start to really have not so much direct authority over those ground elements, but actually go, this is what's happening here. This is what's happening there.
It could have provided perspective, which they don't have, because those collectors and analysts are out looking in village clusters. It's like a soda straw, right? That's what they see.
Yeah.
But there's stuff happening right next to them that they don't have any idea what's going on.
Sure.
I took an intel brief when I first got there. It was a fantastic brief. Colonel gave it. It was great at the division level. Took into account a lot of the dynamics and good plans for everything. It's like, well, okay, but what about Pakistan, which is, sort of the largest influencer right next to us? It's like, yep, didn't hear a thing about it.
Yeah.
And he, of course, bright guy. He clearly knew the issue.
Sure.
But the underlining message was that we are not allowed to talk about that or include it in our operations because that's somebody else's problem.
Right.
And he knew full well that it was the biggest influence beyond us. And maybe even bigger on the border regions, probably bigger than us. So the stovepiping thing gets to be a significant issue. And I think... we had informal contacts across the board, but I think there could have been coordination. Not coordination, that's because we would have bristled at that probably. And our commanders would have bristled at that because we don't want that stuff micromanaged from above.
If I also had the assets, which I never really did, but if I was able to get them, which would be part of what I'd want to do, is I would look at how things moved from the chief of police, from the governor, all the way up to the ministerial links, and studied the flow of things.
Oh yeah, that's something else the guys above us should have been doing.
Right.
Was looking at that.
Because we all looked compartmentalized, like my guy's great, your guy's an asshole. And that's not reality. And so if we're focused on the wrong thing. I'm trying to build capacity here. Like, well, how come supplies can't get down to the bottom and back reliably? Right. How long does it take for a request to get somewhere? I don't know. How the fuck can we not know that? Right. You know,
well, so I would definitely we had some freedom to do that, and it depended on the problems you were working on, whether you got to look at that or not. I was working pretty closely with some of the Kandaks, so I was looking at some of those things.
What's a Kandak?
A Kandak is like a battalion, okay. So it's about 1,000 guys roughly,
and it's an Afghan.
It's an Afghan unit headed by an Afghan colonel. I was working. That was right during the time of a lot of the blue on green. A lot of our guys were getting shot by Afghans.
Who were our partners.
Right,
That's
and there was a lot of question about why is this going on? Well, this played right into my strengths. Like, okay, well, this I can look at. I know about this. So I spent a lot of time with the Afghan army and the local police and so on trying to understand their culture. What are your institutional culture, your individual disposition? Why did you pick this option?
Right.
And all these other things are out there. And I used oral histories for a lot of this. So what's your background generally? It enabled us to understand the Kandak structure a lot better. And then I applied that to other Kandaks going out. But as a result, I got very close to some of the officers there and was privy to some of their problems.
Yeah.
It's like, when I get the fuel here, it's cut 25% with water.
Right.
Well, that's not so good on a diesel engine. So
yeah.
Where's it happening? Yeah. And so we'd trace it back. It's like, that unfortunately, steps on a bunch of other toes. It's like the 9's like, hey, that's my bailiwick. It's like, okay, but I just want to understand what's happening. I'm not fixing blame here. I just want to understand where the water's coming from. And it's because, of course, fuel's being stolen and replaced with water, not as a way to destroy vehicles, but just because they need a certain amount of fluid in there to make so that their theft is covered.
Because again, there's not enough stuff.
Right. Well, and fuel is particularly valuable, so it's a good way to get make some money on the side. Which, since they don't get paid very much, most of them want to make money on the side. Age-old thing in undeveloped places. And it turned out that somebody pretty high up in the Kandak was taking the fuel. Was also protected from his close ties in Kabul, so he couldn't really touch him. The commander knew it was probably him, but couldn't really do anything about it. So we've gradually got him moved out of a role where he could actually do that. The problem is that he's going to do it to something.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is it?
Right.
And how's it going to manifest? So that, you try to get him off to the side where he's not damaging something critical and he's still making his money.
Right.
Because we'd say, arrest him.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's nice, but that's just not realistic.
Put everybody in jail. Yeah. By the way, again, penal system, expensive.
Yeah, well, and we can't afford it, much less them. So.
Yeah.
But
I know we're going to export our black guys and put them in their jail so we can make some space.
Great. Yeah, that'll work. Well, I think – so here's a question for you.
Yeah. By the way, I was going to say, I am not making a serious point in that. I'm mocking our system and how expensive it is.
I would never support that. If you're going to establish today, so how would you set it up? I have my own thoughts on this, but let's get yours.
I would want it to be, okay, so I like the idea of making it some kind of sworn-in position to handle all of the contract mess, and it's hard. I would want someone to specialize in a region, develop over time language capacity, and I don't know if you recall, and this is one of my absolute pet peeves about how dumb we are with this whole language thing. We did not get anywhere near the time that you would need to develop language capacity. It was a waste of time. I mean, we did a lot of dumb things in training, but that's and here, audience, is the proof. When you teach someone like Brian to say the words "Do you speak English?" to someone in the native language. Let me say this again. If I was to say "Parlez anglais" to someone in France, or I could say to the person in French, "Do you speak English?" Why am I learning a phrase that's literally useless? So, I would definitely change. I like the idea of being military, but I don't think the military people can handle it. It's got to be run from somebody outside, someone like you, someone like Trent. But that's not how things work. So I don't know how you fix that part. But they've got to be sworn in so they're legit people, have legit,
otherwise there's no authority.
And you have to be able to take care of them. Look, DA people get hurt when they go into the field.
Right. That's another sore point all the way across for everybody I knew of.
Right.
Because the risk was way beyond what
combat action
was explained to
badges
us.
and combat infantry badges were given out all the time, and I'm like, how many of these have I won? And there's no recognition of it.
Right.
And it doesn't make me less of a combat warrior. I got a gun. I'm standing to watch. I'm laying in diesel from the blown up thing. So those are secondary things. The work, though, has got to be external from the organization so that you can actually help them and get them oriented on the ground. And we have to focus on when tactics no longer make sense with what the ground is. And that person, you have to have a multi-part team. You have to have a huge team.
Of course, that's what a staff is supposed to do.
Right.
So,
but the staff's always oriented towards the commander's mission,
Right.
you know. And these are the 4 things the commander has to do. And I can go into that whole thing. But I think if I'm going to organize it, it's got to be, you know, like we tried to do 5 to 10 people teams, but that's never enough, you know. And it's hard to find that many good people because the job's extraordinarily hard, and we're not trained.
It's not used as a well. Of course, there was that study that came out of NDU, decent study generally, but their finding or their conclusion was that the cross-functional team was the best way to deal with these kind of problems. But when you look at the actual way that teams operated, that's not really what it was. People were given their own individual zones, either a platoon or a brigade or a battalion or whatever, and they were sent out to do those things. So what it really amounted to was the skilled attached person was attached and they were useful. Now, getting reports out of that environment could be tricky.
Yeah.
Because some of those people were great on the verbal advice, but then they wouldn't pass on anything beyond that. So there's, stuff in there that needed to be done.
The reporting I would go, if I was to go back in time, number one, I never could get a job at HTS headquarters. They would never hire me for whatever reason. Didn't know me because I was doing real work. But I would absolutely say, like, all the stuff they train, all that 40-page paper bullshit, you go out on patrol, you write a report, 1,000 words or less, every time in your And when I built our training, that's what I'd like, write it now, get it into someone's hands. Otherwise, your OBE.
You need to write it right when you get back.
Right when you get back. You need to write up a comprehensive thing, putting 10 different things together. Great. But it's based on 10 things you've already published, and you're constantly working on your reading list and the people that are gaining value from what you write and read. Otherwise, I don't need you there. I need you somewhere else.
Although it depends, of course, every brigade has its own flow for how they want to see information and stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And the French had a very different one when I was with them. They wanted, their staff at least, wanted the 30-pager. But of course, you don't brief the 30-pager. It's like, so I actually found it helpful. The 30-pager was the thinking piece. It's like, okay, so I've got all this stuff. What does this mean? So I'm closing the door. Everybody stay out of here.
All right.
I'm going to figure out what this means. And you chow through the thing. It's like, okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Now, out of that will come the single-page, 1,000-word dealie that summarizes this, that's the so what and all of that, and the whatever course of action there are and so on. But there could also be some spin-off things. Look, here's some things that, here's what this really means.
Right.
Now that I've spent, 2 days thinking about this, or a day thinking about this with nothing interfering, this is what I think, where I think we need to go. And then all that would happen was you'd go up and brief the big guy, and they'd drill down some. It's like, well, what about this, this, and this? Oh, sir, your staff's got that on page, I think it's 9.
Yeah.
We talk about that. So they can go dig into that if they want. But the short version now is this.
Yeah.
So I have thought that through.
Yeah.
And so it helps with the, the comprehensive briefing to know that you've thought it through. To also, as you're writing out, it's like, wait, I haven't addressed this at all.
Right.
We don't have data on this. Hey, we're missing a hole here.
Yeah.
Hey, we need a mission. I can't fill this in without this.
Right.
But it gives you what you need to make the case. It's like,
I would want people in the field way more than that, though. I'd want them constantly writing, constantly pushing
It's got to be both.
up.
I don't like I don't like it when people, don't go to the field and try to write up what the realities of the field are. That makes no sense to me. But on the other hand, there's something to be said for going out 20 days, doing a bunch of stuff, and it's like, okay, this stuff's all spinning around now.
Yeah. You've got to come back and report back so that when I sit down in the room, they're like, oh, that's Pete.
Right.
He always has great information.
Yeah.
Right. You have to be present enough for that. The other thing is
also you and the adjoining team need to know what I'm working on.
Right.
So it's like, look, here's the comprehensive. So this will help you if you got any questions about this stuff. You can dig right in, and I'll answer questions, of course. But I won't be here forever.
Yeah.
So there's got to be some record of what this was.
And that gets to be tough. You get to be really administratively heavy. And this is the rub, right? Like, do we spend time being organized? Do we spend time collecting? Do we spend time disseminating? Right. And it's
a balance,
you're always trying to balance those things because it gets to be
and it's dependent on what are the needs in your zone and with your unit.
Yeah.
That's why I always argued it wasn't a system. It was maybe human terrain, but it was never a system.
Right.
So, I'm not sure you could systemize it because thing is so different in every little quadrant.
Right.
That
Commander to commander.
That's-
This commander hates the color blue.
right.
Don't you dare put blue on this slide. And you're like, oh, what else do I have to know? I mean, it's a whole. Again, we got to study us more than them.
Right.
Always.
Put it in a quad chart, or I don't want to see it. Okay.
Yeah.
I had a guy who was like, it doesn't mean anything if it's not quantified.
yeah.
I said, well, sir, okay, I can put all these in quantitative terms for you. The problem is that I don't have any raw data to
Yeah.
build the quantitative model for you because we don't have the kind of comprehensive studies we would need
Right.
to get validity.
And no one has that. By the way, no one has that capacity.
No.
Not in places like Afghanistan is so non-permissive audience. That means it's so dangerous to walk around that you can't effectively collect things. And when we did get things from the program that would provide it, it was always rife with errors and lies. So it's like this is not a quantitative place at this point in time.
Right. Well, if you think about it, most of what we're doing was what I would call exploratory research.
Sure.
So you go through with, okay, what are the important variables here? I don't even know.
I don't even know.
So you go out and look and try to identify what those are. That's about the phase that we had up. If you had a more permissive environment and more time,
Yeah.
you could then go out and say, I'm going to try to confirm my theory that these are the three variables. And there's social science ways to do that.
Sure.
But we did not have the luxury of going into that. So the people who want that social science validity, well, Heisenberg, we're changing it by going out there, et cetera, et cetera. Even with that aside, even if we could get the data, which
Let's be honest,
as you say,
this
you
is
can't.
at best. Rich and I use the term. It's gonzo anthropology. I'm going to be part of it. The unit is part of this. It has to be.
Well, it's part of the
that
study.
way.
It's like,
Right.
okay, how is this impacting on the thing?
Right.
And I think that if you're ignoring one of the larger variables in there, then you're probably putting, sort of a twisted thing, which, you can the perspective from here looks like this. From here it looks like that. Okay, that's valuable too. But what's valuable for the mission I have coming up? That's going to be the critical thing. I mean, all these things really, I think that it comes around to, they're highly complicated, which is a cop-out, but that the synergy between the reductive staff process and an expansive civilian process interlocked works really well.
Yeah.
Maybe you can argue they should be contractors, maybe they should be duty civilians, whatever. I mean, there's different arguments about that. But I think most commanders that I had contact with said, really valuable to not have somebody embedded in the staff who I could bounce the stuff off of, which makes our job delicate because you've got to maintain all those staff relationships without, catching them blindside, but also saying, yes, sir, I think they're giving you these three things, but I think we're not thinking about these other whole bunch of things.
Sure.
And not to throw the whole thing open and throw all your plans out the window, but if you give me a little time and some resources, I think maybe we should be going down a different road. And I'll run that by the staff, of course. So that maybe next time we come up with this, the next cycle, we can bring you something more.
Yeah, you had to be careful, the staff, sergeant major, all these people, because they don't want you to overdo what they do. And that's why, I kept my recommendations.
And it's hubris, too. It's like, you guys are working hard. You get a bunch of eyes on this.
And even if you're not trying to be like that, that's how you come across. So I would always hold, what are your recommendations? I'm like, who me? You want my recommendations?
Right.
And I'd wait until they begged me for them. The commander wants to know what to do. And I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I'll work with you on it. Because then I'll contribute to the staff process because you can't. But it's easy to let your ego go. And you're like, yep, I know what to do. Because you don't.
Well, as soon as you say that in most things, you've demonstrated that you don't actually know what's going on.
How was it? We had a good time, right?
Yeah,
of course. Super easy. How do people find you again on the internets?
You can find me on academia.edu, Brian R. Price, and I'm the guy at Hawaii Pacific University. Easy to find.
Dr. Brian Price. And he is fantastic. He's my friend, and I'm so glad we got a chance to do this. Thanks for tolerating me on a chat. Sometimes I push hard, but that's because we're passionate about this stuff.
Yeah, of course. It was you're dealing with people's lives, frankly, on the line, and it matters. So I think if you're not doing it with passion, you're not doing it right.